Yes, Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have some experience in how this type of grant funding can help cities. In that in our city, we had what was called youth court, and this was to redirect some of the youth who were starting to go down the wrong path, but you know, there was still an opportunity there to bring them back, and they it's a court of their own peers. It's law enforcement that's involved, that mentors them, counsels them. It's completely run by other kids who have gone through the program. And most times these kids come back and they become mentors themselves. And most times these kids do stay out of trouble. They get back into school, they graduate, and they move on to bigger and better things. But this type of grant funding is something that helps keep these programs in place. I know in my city it was cut because the funds weren't there a few years ago. And it was disappointing because there is no other organization out there really that can take these kids and say, we see there's a problem, whether that's because of the conditions at home. You know, there's a variety of reasons of why kids do this. But that's the only organization out there that is trustworthy, that has some street credibility, and that seems to really work. So I like the fact that, and Senator Leno, I'm sure I'm making your day. This is 2 days in a row that I've been advocating for spending money. So let the record reflect I am fully in support of augmenting this program.
I appreciate and respect that you have your priorities as well. And this is a very important program. Ms. Bosler.
This was not, augmenting this program was not part of our proposal. As the LAO noted, there is $9.2 million in the base for this program. This program's been funded with restitution fund. We just do not support the commitment of ongoing general fund resources that can't be sustained over the long term. And I would note that this is maybe a very worthwhile program, but is definitely purely a discretionary program, as local law enforcement is primarily funded locally.
Sorry for the interruption. Thank you. Page 9 is local public safety infrastructure. This is an Assembly proposal. Ms. Peters.
The Assembly provided $8 million general fund for 3 local public safety capital outlay projects, police station projects in the county of Kings County. We would recommend the Senate version on this one, as construction of police facilities is typically not a state responsibility.
Do we have much precedent for this sort of state investment in capital outlay projects?
It's typically not a state responsibility to fund local police infrastructure.
All right. Ms. Bosler?
Yes, we would agree with that statement, and just point to the $765 million in back mandate costs that are being paid in the next few weeks, and then also we do have a $40 million for local law enforcement grants that are also built into the budget.
Well, maybe see. My staff continues to tell me that we fund sheriff's offices, don't we? Jails, sheriff jails.
True, sir, Board. That is correct. We do fund the construction of county jails, but we haven't, to our knowledge, at any time recently funded any construction of police offices.
Okay. We'll hold it open and see.
I think the LAO's position here is that the difference between cities and counties being that counties are an adjunct of the state, cities independent entities. Is that why we do use state funds for county projects?
Yeah, our position was essentially that because this isn't something the state has done typically with respect to the police facilities, that this is something that the legislature would want to reconsider setting a precedent.
I wouldn't be surprised if there might be a few other cities that might like to follow if we were, but we'll leave it open for now. Yes, Senator Nielsen.
Let me just add on this point. Yes, it's sort of not common, but yes, it is common. And what is not common is the tremendous impact that state policy has now had on our local communities, particularly these valley communities where they have so many prisons. And there has been a huge impact. The folks who come into the communities that sort of follow the inmates to the prisons, and the impact that just realignment and other things have had on our local communities indeed has changed the dynamics significantly from what it used to be. And what we haven't been talking much about are the local jails and the impact on our local jails. We haven't even begun to see that yet. Within months after realignment, the county of Fresno was sued under the same inmate health care challenges that cost the state billions. Now our county jails are going to really be assuming enormous costs and needs. So that needs to be taken. This is a small item, but I'm just forewarning, we have significant issues ahead related to local incarceration facilities. And as well, if realignment is going to work, it's going to require an awful lot more investment in community rehabilitative opportunities that has not happened.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. Ms. Bosler, is the number close to $2 billion in bond funding that we've approved for county jails in recent years?
In recent years, it's $1 billion in lease revenue bond, but then if you go back to AB 900, it's quite a bit additional. We have been working very closely with counties after realignment, especially to address issues that they have in their local infrastructure related to their jails, realizing that with realignment, some inmates who had been coming to prison are now staying locally, and some of those inmates may have longer sentences than jails were built to accommodate. Some counties did not have jails that really accommodated long-term stay offenders. And so with that, we've been working closely with the sheriffs and the counties to provide some assistance. These monies have been provided with match by the counties to assist in updating and also making sure that the new spaces have room for rehabilitative programming and also health care, which are things that are needed when inmates are staying for a longer term than really what the jails were originally designed to do, which was a short-term holding space.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on to page 10, I don't want to forget Assemblywoman Melendez. We took a vote on page 4. We left the roll open on the Assembly side. So we have the final vote on page 4 is 3-0-3-0 for the Senate. Page 10. This is a governor's proposal.
This proposed trailer bill language clarifies the terms and conditions of probation. In the case of summary revocation, it ensures that after the People v. Leva decision, there was some ambiguity in whether or not during the period of summary revocation, the terms and conditions of probation still applied. This would ensure that probationers during that period are held accountable for the terms of their probation, including programming, restitution payments, search and seizure.
Thank you. Ms. Peters.
The Senate declined to hear the proposed trailer bill, and the Assembly adopted it as placeholder language. We would note that the proposed trailer bill seems reasonable and sort of would restore prior practice for our probation departments, but it's something that you may want to consider through the policy process.
So this does sound like pure policy, and if I'm correct, I think Assemblymember Quirk had a bill that was in the Assembly Public Safety Committee just on this last year, and I think it died in that Public Safety Committee. Can you give us the history of the state Supreme Court's ruling on this? Is this in any way already deemed unconstitutional, Ms. Peters?
I think we would probably defer to the administration on the details of the Supreme Court ruling and how their proposal would affect the ruling.
Okay.
We believe that this is consistent with the Supreme Court ruling, and the Supreme Court ruling in People v. Leva basically upheld the current probation practice, which this would just clarify.
So you don't believe there are any due process issues?
Not that we're aware of, no.
And Ms. Peters, can you even address that?
We haven't evaluated those aspects of the proposal. We just would note that if there's policy considerations that the legislature has, there's no budgetary impact of the proposal. It's not tied to a specific spending measure, and it's something you could consider in more detail through the policy process.
So Ms. Bosler, why is this so important? It needs to be done in the budget right now.
I think that this is a clarification that we thought was important to the operation of probation departments around the state, and it rose to the level of importance that we thought it should be clarified going forward, and so it was included in our budget.
All right.
Well, it seems,
Mr. Chairman,
I guess one of the concerns, as we look at this, and obviously there's some more work that needs to be done on the language to reach some level of compromise. I assume there was a bill that went through the process, so we've had some some legal analysis of this position that's here, so that we're not basically writing laws through here that contradict other ones that are on the books and denying people access or denying their rights. And so it seems like it's more complicated, and this is an unusual way in many ways, and maybe not unusual up here, to push through a new policy or an explanation of a policy without much dialogue about it. So that's generally what we've been thinking in terms of looking at this. Obviously, there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and I'm not sure if this is the process to get the work done.
And I would agree.
Thank you.
This is.
Yeah. So I would love to engage you in a policy debate on this right now because I have a very firm opinion of it. But I'm going to restrain myself because I don't think this is the place or time for it. I think it should be done in a policy committee, not in budget. So we're moving on. I'm sorry, Senator Nielsen, of course.
I would just submit, I certainly would hope, but it doesn't give me much hope if this so-called quirk bill was held in committee. This is an issue. All right, you're a probationer today, you're a probationer tomorrow, but now there's an interpretation that now if you abscond, which means you're on the run, you are violating your terms of probation. There's nothing due process about that. You screwed up. Now, you may have to be accountable for that, and there is a procedure that has long been established for that, so that that person who is absconding does face a consequence. If you are an inmate parolee who abscond, then that could result in a long return to custody. That doesn't happen now, and if you absconded and left the state, that was deemed an escape. This is serious behavior. You are then not being accountable. I think this needs to be addressed, if not here, very quickly, statutorily.
Senator Nielsen, as tempting as it is, I'm not going to
Now,
take
don't get
the bait.
into it. You're not going to take the bait because there's some other factors that are not, that are in play.
We're going to move on
here.
to page 11, and hopefully we can see that in a policy committee at some time. Familiar subject, page 11. The one-time funding that keeps coming back. I think we're in our 4th year now. Local law enforcement assistance. Ms. Bosler, we'll let you start off with your proposal.
Our January proposal included $40 million for local law enforcement and grants to be allocated consistent with the way it's been allocated for the last several years.
And on that point of the last several years, do you remember our conversation that we had about a year ago at this time with regard to the third reiteration of what was one-time funding?
Yes, absolutely.
That it was
And
going to be the
I will
last
say
time.
that we had internal conversations before putting the budget together, and our determination was for an additional year that we thought that the $40 million was helpful and providing supports in cities, in local jurisdictions that were helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Peters, could you give us a clear history of how this started? when it started, what the understanding was, and how many years that understanding has not been respected?
Sure. The funding for city law enforcement was initially approved 3 years ago, the current, as a short-term 3-year program, with the current year as the final year of the program. Initially, the funding was around $24 million. It was increased. The administration came back the second year and asked to increase the level of funding for the duration of the program, and then came back last year and increased it again to a $40 million level for the third year of the program. And so you initially approved a 3-year program, but you have seen this request multiple times as the level of funding has been increased each year of the program. The program that the legislature approved would expire at the end of the current year. The administration's proposal, as Ms. Bosler said, would be to extend it at the $40 million level for 1 additional year.
So let me make sure I got this clearly. The first year, 3 years ago, it was to be for 3 years, and we agreed to $24 million for each of 3 years.
Correct.
The second year, the administration came back and said, well, we're going to change that $24 million to $40 million.
I believe the second year was 27.
27. Okay.
27 and a half.
Okay, 27 and a half, okay. So we broke the agreement that we agreed to the first year of 24, 24, 24. Now we're 24, 27 and a half. Was it agreed that the third last year would be 27 and a half?
And the
Or
final
revert back
year
to
was
24?
40.
Oh,
It came back.
The third year was 40. And
So it was originally proposed as 20 million in the first year, 27.5 in the second year, 27.5 in the third year.
that was the original agreement.
Original agreement.
Okay.
Then it was increased to 24 million in the first year,
So you broke the first.
increased by $4 million through the use of the 9840 item. We realized that in discussions, 20 million does not go far when you are trying to reach all local law enforcement jurisdictions and giving local police the tools and funding necessary to address some of the local needs that they had. It was originally addressed at mitigating some of the effects of the recession. And so the second year it was 27.5, I think, as originally proposed. The third year is when we proposed an increase from 27.5 to 40, and this is now a proposal to sustain the 40.
So though we agreed originally 2024
7.
and then 27, I'm sorry, let me get that right because I want to be clear here.
20, 27.5, 27.5.
20, 27 and a half, 27 and a half. And then before you got started, we bumped it for the reasons you just stated to 24, 27 and a half, 27 and a half.
40.
Now we're here in the last year and you're here to say that even the 27 and a half isn't enough, we've got to go to 40.
No, you went 40 last year.
In the current year, the funding's at 40.
And at 40, right.
Current year's 40.
Got it, yeah. So I don't feel like our deliberations over these past years at this conference committee have been respected. We've made agreements, and then the next year comes back and the budget doesn't reflect what we agreed upon in the conference committee and that which we signed off on in the final budget. Am I misunderstanding something?
I think every fall when we at the Department of Finance and the governor and the governor's office work on preparing a budget, we consider many, many factors. And sometimes we propose new proposals and sometimes we propose to continue one-time proposals that were intended to be one-time that we reevaluated. I think different information came to light, and we decided that 40 million in January was the right amount to continue to support this program.
I think one of the concerns, and I'm not on the Public Safety Committee subcommittee, one of the concerns of when I chatted with our persons on public safety, and I asked when they were deliberating this matter, and then they eliminated, then they added some back, and you've got a mixture here at this point. One of their concerns was when they asked, what is this money for? Specifically, what is money being used for? They really didn't get a response. They didn't get a direct proposal response as if they identified what the 40 million was for. Then once the 40 million obviously was about to be taken away, then people had a number of things they started telling them. But basically, there didn't appear to be any direct response about what the money was for and what it would be used for in the coming year. That it obviously must have been something done during recession. And so some of the discussion is that revenues are better at the local level now than they were before. So it's not like we're funding police departments at all. We're giving them some additional money. That's in the scheme of their total budget is not a tremendous amount of money. So it's obviously not keeping these departments alive and not basically making them do their job. So it's, I don't know what, we don't, and then it's, like I said, since then I've gotten some calls about, well, we do this and we do that and so forth and so on, you know, with the resources that they were getting. But we didn't, according to my committee, when they shared it with me and their recommendation, they said, I said, well, what was the report about? They said they didn't get a report. They really didn't get an adequate response that says, this is what this money does, this is what it's for, you know, and this is what we hope to accomplish with it. So that being said, then the committee backed off, initially did none, then backed off and did 20. And then said, okay, well, if we do 40, it ought to be targeted towards something for one-time expense. And that one-time expense had to do with body cameras and use of force data that they think should be collected. So they targeted the money specifically to things to be done statewide, and rather than putting it out for grants to come in at some other level. But they did leave 20 million just to phase down the 40. That was the general thinking. Phase it down to 20 and then phase it out completely. So that was our thinking behind that. And there's been some up and down resistance and some support for it among the law enforcement itself. But that was our general thinking, because we did not get a clear response to, according to the committee, they did not get a clear response to what the money was for, going to be used for. That it was just kind of folded in and moved forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the explanation of the Assembly proposal. Ms. Peters, could I ask you to walk us through the Senate proposal?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Both houses made modifications, were sort of rejected and replaced the governor's proposal, with both houses having a total of $40 million in funding. Mm-hmm. The Senate's $40 million would be split between two pots, with $30 million to provide grants for initiatives intended to strengthen the relationship between communities and law enforcement, to be given out by the Board of State and Community Corrections, and $10 million to the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, or POST, for behavioral health training.
Good. Thank you.
We have a compromise on this one, if you would be interested in hearing that.
We're always interested in compromise.
The compromise that we would recommend is two $20 million pots. The first $20 million pot to be distributed according to the governor's proposed formula, but requiring that agencies that receive the funds use it for one-time purposes, and also provide the use of force data that the Assembly was interested in receiving. The second $20 million pot being used for grants from BSCC, to be given out by BSCC for grants to strengthen the relationship between communities and law enforcement, including one eligible use could be funding behavioral health training at the Commission on Post. We also think that since the funding is one-time, the legislature could specify that all of these funds be used for one-time purposes, and would note that that could include additional training with the money that goes out on a formula for mental health training, or body cameras as well, which were both priorities of the legislature.
Thank you, Ms. Peters. One question I would have to ask you, Ms. Bosler, is, and I won't repeat all the comments I've already made, but in light of this, dare I call it, tawdry history of this funding, can we even, let me put it this way, I would imagine we should expect that when we do this one time this year, that there will be another in the January budget. I mean, what reason do we have to believe that it wouldn't repeat itself yet again?
Well, there has been no commitments for ongoing funding here. So that the proposal is $40 million for the budget year, and that's the extent that we have discussed this issue.
That is the exact answer I got last year.
Which seems to be completely inconsistent with what the administration has been telling us about. They don't want to commit to ongoing general fund spending, so it just seems inconsistent. I don't know where I lie on this issue still, but if we, I mean, if we're going to keep on saying that, it just seems that this policy seems to be completely inconsistent. And the other issue that I have, again, with all respect, and it's nothing to administration, is from my understanding is that the police chiefs didn't even attend our budget subcommittee to even ask for the money, to even have a dialogue. And so I just think that that's, you know, that doesn't just bode well for, I mean, is it just expected that we're going to just approve this? So, I have issues with that as well. So just to know.
Thank you, Senator Lara. Senator Nielsen.
Well, we don't have time, but I would suggest members of the legislature all talk to their local police chiefs and let them tell us that everything's well out there, that they don't need any help. And it's not the recession that's impacted our local PDs, it's realignment that's impacted our local PDs. That's a product of legislative action and some other statutes that have been changed that have impacted them. And indeed, that was needed at the time. But I would argue, along with finance, situations have not improved in terms of our local police departments. And so that's my general approach. Now, the harder approach, this legislature is not much good at keeping its word either. The rolling tax increases and the various budget deals that have been reneged on, that's commonplace around here. This is a small item, but I think we should consider it in light of the impact on our local police departments and what they're suffering right now. That's been imposed by the legislature, and the legislature is responsible for that. I think that the analysts may have something worth talking about here in terms of a compromise, but I certainly would expect and would advocate that this be coming back every year until we see some changes that diminish the impacts on our local police departments.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. In fact, I would have greater respect for your proposal that this be recognized as ongoing spending. If that's the case. Now, you don't have my support for it necessarily,
with accountability.
but this pretense that it was just for 3 years, oh, and then we're going to up it even though we agreed to a lower amount, and then we're going to come back a fourth year, and with no guarantees that it doesn't come back a fifth or a sixth.
Mr. Chairman, I would support it as ongoing spending,
I know you would.
just as I would support the tax increases from extinguishing when they're supposed to be sunsetted.
Yes. Spend more, collect less. I would also have to say, if we're going to go talk to our local police chiefs, that we also check in with our local developmental regional centers and ask them if they need more money, and that we go back and talk to our local early care and education providers and ask them if they need more money. If we go back to our local universities and college campuses and ask our chancellors and presidents if they need more money, everyone needs more money. Ms. Peters, could you talk to us about our local law enforcement grants that the administration has put forward in recent years for these kinds of needs?
In terms of the existing program?
Yeah.
So in terms of how the funding is used, I think, as Vice Chair Weber indicated, there isn't a real comprehensive knowledge of how the money has been used. There's no reporting requirement currently on the use of the funds. And they're available just for local law enforcement to be used as they see fit. So there isn't a great deal of information. There's been some sort of anecdotal or some limited information. We've talked to a few different, police departments about how they're using their funding, and it seems like it's being used for a wide variety of purposes depending on the police department. We would note that total police department budget statewide is in the neighborhood of roughly $10 billion, and so $40 million in additional funding from the state is really kind of a drop in the bucket and is sort of
$10 billion? Repeat that for?
For police departments statewide.